Well, we're ready to get to this next part. This isn't used too much in preaching and so forth, but I thought I'd read the passage the way W.J.A. Power at Perkins in his the book of Genesis, a folk theology, describes this next part.
Who is the author?
W.J.A. Power, Dr. Power down at Perkins Seminary. And this will be the beginning of the Genesis 13, but it kind of picks up at where the rape of Sarah or keeping the ancestress in danger story was just kind of inserted, and this kind of picks up where the story was going before. And then it says, "So Abram went up from Egypt to the land of Canaan, accompanied by his wife and all that belonged to him. And Lot also had profited from their Egyptian venture," according to Power, although it's not in the regular translation. We just pick up Lot on the way back. Anyway, because of their extensive holdings in cattle and sheep, it was necessary for them to journey gradually from camping place to camping place until they came to the area between Bethel and Ai, where Abram had previously erected an altar. Now, this area is not particularly fertile. Since they were both very wealthy with extensive holdings, the land was not able to support them both. Consequently, trouble arose between their herdsmen. It might have got to the serious stage had not Abram one day said to Lot, "Look, we simply can't go on quarreling, nor can we permit our herdsmen to go on quarreling, for we are kinsmen. The whole land is open to you, isn't it? You can take whatever you like. If you go to the left, then I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, then I'll go to the left." So Lot looked out over the land, and he viewed the stony hills of the promised land of Canaan, and then he looked farther to the east and down into the Jordan Valley to the area around Sodom, and noted the contrast, for the shrubs of Sodom and Gomorrah were well watered as well as in Eden, and the Garden of Eden, as well as the land of Egypt. And so Lot left the promised land and went down into the valley and chose it as his dwelling place. And he and Abraham parted from one another. Now Abram, when he was left with the hill country of Canaan, and Lot settled in the valley of Jordan. Now after Lot had left, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "Look around now to the north, the south, the east, the west, for all the land that you see. I'm going to give it to you and to your descendants forever. And I'm going to make your descendants like the dust of the earth, so that it will be as possible to count the dust of the earth as to count your descendants. Go, travel the length and breadth of the land, for I am going to give it to you." And so Abram moved to the south, and then went to live beside the sacred oak of Mamre at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Now, Power has a brief little commentary about this and the previous story of Abram and Sarah going down into Egypt. It says that there is an element of tension in these two stories that is not always apparent to modern readers. In the first instance, because of his cowardice and duplicity, Abram puts the promise and God's plan into jeopardy. If it had not been for the Lord, who knows what might have happened in that oriental harem. And as far as that goes, who knows what did happen. In the second instance, Abram again puts both promise and plan in jeopardy through his magnanimous generosity. This time it is Lot's avarice that saves him. In both instances, the threat is real enough, and in both instances, the situation is saved, not because of Abram, but in spite of him. Now that's Power's take on that story of the divisions. Now, it's a part of these two stories go together, and I thought I'd back up a little bit because I was reading Brueggemann, and he had some thoughts that I missed. And this is an interpretive technique for all of Scripture, and particularly these Old Testament stories. I found in Brueggemann this view of the story that it is important as this overarching theme for all of the Pentateuch. It is this recurring literary technique of juxtaposition, which means holding two things in contrast. You juxtapose them. Two things in contrast. In this case, Abram's great faith to go forth as God commanded immediately after he sensed the call, and then he gets to Canaan and he meets the famine, and he has great unfaith and unfaithfulness because he immediately abandons that place God had showed him, and he goes away to try to save himself. And then he gets this juxtaposition, the land of famine and Canaan with the land of waters and food and grazing, a juxtaposition, scarcity and abundance. The third juxtaposition is the imperial power of Egypt and Pharaoh versus the powerlessness of Abram. Force and power versus helplessness. Now, Brueggemann points out that the biblical literature is literature of survival. And this is something we don't stop and think about too often. The narratives told by the powerless people in community in order to maintain their courage and their hope and maintain their identity and dignity in the face of these overwhelming odds and the unresponsive power that is so often over them. When the imperial reality and helpless faith are held in and helplessness and faith are held in juxtaposition, then Yahweh is introduced to be a source of power to save and to overcome those difficulties and to change the balance of power, to redeem the lost when it seems lost. And even when weak Israel still has capacity to affect and impact the affairs of nations. So with Abram representing Israel, as he goes down into Egypt, he's powerless, Pharaoh's powerful, yet his presence there and God's presence, because he's there, has the power to affect this great nation of Egypt. So those are thoughts and ideas to encourage and give the people of Israel hope as they hear these stories. It also shows that God will be faithful to God's promises even when Israel, or Abram, is unfaithful or cowardly. So that's a little part that deals with those two stories. Now, on this separation of Abram from Lot, the background on this outward life and the nature of the patriarchs to remember is they really weren't nomads in the sense of riding camels like some other peoples of the time. The Amalekites, who were like Bedouins of today, but these were nomads who had herds of sheep and goats, and they call them small cattle, that moved slowly. They grazed. But with the camels of the Bedouins, they can go fast and they can attack and pillage and plunder and then ride off and get away. So their lifestyle is to move back and forth from the steppes to the fields around the more inhabited areas, and after fields were harvested, then there's extra stuff left over besides the grain that the sheep and goats can eat and have as forage. So they would move back and forth around and stay in close contact. Now, one of their styles, since they weren't warriors, was to get along, to be amicable with the local residents and among themselves, because they were a minority and it wasn't good to be fighting among themselves. So Abraham is the one who shows the character of proposing a peaceful settlement of this conflict. if we're looking at it from Von Rod's viewpoint. His magnanimousness and his generosity with his nephew Lot, which is the frame we want to put around that picture. Abram is a peacemaker. He's generous, he's gracious, he's benevolent. He offers his nephew Lot the first choice. Now, as the senior in that relationship, ordinarily, with a sense of power and authority, he would take the first choice. But he doesn't. He offers it to the nephew. But power suggests that this is careless and it may be cowardly. He's not up for a fight, so he just kind of whatever you want and lets it go. But that puts the promise in jeopardy according to power. So he has that different view. And they also sends to look at Lot as being greedy and kind of grabbing for all that he can get, which is a frame we could put around Lot and his character. But Brueggemann's interpretation that Abraham risks everything when he allows Lot to choose, but he sees it as Abram's faith in this risking. It's an act of faith, according to Brueggemann, and an act and showing his belief in the promise at this time, because he knows that God will be faithful and God will provide. And so it's kind of out of my hands. So I can, be gracious and generous, and whatever happens, it's going to work out because God is in control. God will provide. So that's one way of looking at it and interpreting. But Brueggemann points out that the story's origin may have served a tribal purpose and other ethnological functions to explain why some non-Israelite tribes received portions of the land that they were occupying at the time this was being written, or time before it was written down but was being told. Why are those people living over there? This is how they got there. But the historical legal practices revealed in this narration, a way of taking ownership or possessing ownership of the land or transferring land, is based upon the capacity to see. Lot looks and he sees, and then they have this agreement. They both look and they both see, and so I will take this land. This land between aisle 2 and aisle 1. This is my land. Do you see the aisle? And you see the aisle? Yes, we see the aisle. We agree. This is my section. So that's the way their deals worked out, because they were a pre-literate people. And they may have gotten witnesses while they were doing the seeing. Now, Abram is to walk about the land to see all that he will possess. Some parts of the land aren't seeable from one vantage point, so you have to walk the land. And I would think in the early times in our country, when people were doing this, before we had official surveys, that when people were exchanging land, they would walk together. And they would go down to where that stream is or that ridge is, and they would walk it, and they would say, all right, this is the dividing line, and we're walking it. That's your side, and this is my side, and we're in agreement. So they would walk it off, and instead of just trying to describe it to each other. Have you ever tried to receive or give directions to somebody, and what you are describing or what they are describing and what the other is envisioning is so different? It is really hard sometimes that the words we try to use, even though we can be very descriptive with word pictures, often don't work. And sometimes we'll say right when we mean left, or north and we mean south. I don't know if I've told you all this, that when I was in the 5th grade, when we were learning geography, our little desks were facing south, so that as I was looking at the map of the United States, and off of the right side of the map was the East Coast, and so I imagined, and we're right in the middle in Oklahoma and Norman, so I would imagine going through Arkansas and, all the way to the East Coast off that way. And then to the West Coast, to California, that way, and Canada, that way, and Mexico, that way. And so now if I'm talking and I'm not stopping and thinking, and I'll just kind of gesture, Canada or New York City, I'll have it completely turned around. And so I have to consciously, even to this day, I still have to consciously change it around. Now, I get in trouble a lot of times because when I start talking about it, I'll change it around. And then when I get to the end, I won't remember I already changed it, and I'll change it around again. So it's all backwards. So anyway, so those miscommunications can happen if you're just talking. So it's good to walk the boundaries. And so that's what they did then, and we have it in the story, a vestige of those early ways of making these contrasts. So anyway, the capacity to see and visualize where the lands are. Brueggemann interprets that God's blessing allows both Lot and Abraham to prosper greatly, and thus the need for the more land and avoiding the potential conflict. However, he reintroduces this theme of juxtaposition. This time it's the juxtaposition of the views of reality. Brueggemann presents the idea that Abram had the great faith and trust in the promise of God at this point, so he has a different way of seeing or perceiving the economic reality that he and Lot are facing. The question of dividing their wealth, Abraham and Lot, has two views that Brueggemann brings up. One is the power of the promise to provide abundance. We've prospered, the abundance. I'm not upset or anxious about how we're going to divide. He's just very, you go over there, I'll go over there, and we'll continue to prosper. We just need to spread out a little bit so we're not bumping into each other. But Lot seems to embody what Brueggemann would call is the ideology of scarcity. Now, Brueggemann reflects on this economic and political realities today, and he states that both capitalists and Marxists alike, and with Marxism we can jump over into socialism or communism. He says all of these major economic theories are based upon an ideology of scarcity, from which come the social policies, the personal conduct mores, international politics, all conducted on the presupposition of scarcity. That's the basis where they begin. There's only so much of this, and we're going to have to fight for it. To protect it or to take it away from somebody else. Now, Brueggemann was our Barton Clinton Gordy lecturer. How many remember his being here? Do you remember he brought up this theme of the ideology of scarcity in his lectures? Do you remember that? You do. I did too. I don't remember a whole lot, but it struck a chord with me, and as I was reading it again, that he did speak about that at that time. And at that time, he was making the difference between the ideology of scarcity with the theology of grace. That a creator God created enough. There is enough if we will share and work together. We don't have to hoard and gather and possess because we're afraid of someone else grabbing it before we grab it. So it looks like Lot has this idea. He's going to grab the best when he can because they're worried about the scarcity in the more rocky area. Well, in that sense, Lot makes this quick decision to grab the best, the richest, the well-watered land, and the beautiful land and fruitfulness of the land, and he chooses it quickly. And then he leaves Abraham with what's left over. Now, it's really not desert wasteland, but it is somewhat rocky. It's not the Garden of Eden. It's not the fertile Nile Valley in Egypt that Lot is perceiving and wanting to grab a hold of. Well, Brueggemann suggests that the whole story exists for the sake of God's intervention in verses 14 when he gives Abram this word that this is your land, now walk around. It's that first contractual way of possessing or taking ownership of the land. And Brueggemann suspects that the whole leading up to that, the division of the land or the property, is a way of preparing for that important interaction with Abraham and God. The speech is unexpected, but confirms the promised land and says to Abram, you may claim ownership. This is yours. Brueggemann ends this interpretation of the Abraham-Lot division of wealth account by stating it is a part of the two-story juxtaposition of the rape of Sarah and the division of the wealth. Both narratives have promise-making, blessing-giving God. Trust of Abraham is an issue in both. In the first, he does not trust. He goes off, runs away from the drought in the promised land. And then the second, Brueggemann asserts that he does trust in the promise, so he can be generous. He's not anxious or worried about there not being enough. There is enough. You take what you want, I'll take what's left. There's that sense of trust in God's providing. So he's not anxious, and it's a sign of his faith, a sign of a sense of well-being under God's care. The ideology of scarcity at work in the supply and demand situation we see today, they use this in sales pitches. Only so much time is left. You got to hurry down and buy before the sale ends. Or we only have so many. There are just a few that we're offering at this price. And at the Black Friday, they have a few TVs that are virtually giving them away. So everybody has to line up and camp out to get ready to rush in because of the ideology of scarcity. This deal is only a short time and there's only a few, and so they tap into this ideology to motivate people to come down and fight and trample each other trying to get there first. And then we've got another issue that's before us. I mean, this idea is very timely. There's a lot of discussion now about minimum wage. Let's raise the minimum wage. And so there are one side of thinking that, there's enough money around that if the lowest paid folks, if they're given a raise, every dime and penny that they earn, they're going to spend it because they have so little. They're going to buy necessities. And so that money's not thrown away or wasted. It's being put forth back into the community. And so it's going to be an economic boost. Then the other side says, well, that's going to make employers think, well, I've only got so much, ideology of scarcity. I can't hire an extra person to do the work. I'm going to have to lay someone off in order to have that resources to pay everybody a raise. And then somebody's saying that, well, it's going to make our McDonald's hamburger go up to $8 or $10 a hamburger, and then nobody's going to be able to afford to eat. Well, anyway, it's interesting news about the ideology of scarcity. I read, I wish I could have found it. I think everything was getting too cluttered, and I thought, I'm not going to be able to use this, and I threw it away. But now I am, now that I ran into Brueggemann's thing. It was someplace, and I don't remember whether it was McDonald's or it was Walmart, but one of the big corporations, somebody at the corporate office was trying to help the low-income employees. So they wrote up a piece to help them budget. Anybody read about this or hear about this? Try to help them budget. Well, the intent was to help, but whoever prepared it went through it all, and first thing that was alarming, the budget presumed 40 hours at minimum wage, plus 30 hours of a second job at minimum wage in order to have a living budget. And within the budget, they forgot about food. They forgot about food. They just flat left it off. And then they were trying to be careful, but there was another section about a budget and that how you should stay fit and eat right and eat healthy. But it was quite curious, the person, and we're just thinking, maybe they just, at some corporation, they assigned an intern. Go do this, make up this budget and thing. But the person who did it was trying to show the worst case example of an unhealthy meal. And when they did so, they went to a McDonald's commercial and they took a picture of a McDonald's meal and put it as unhealthy meal. Actually, Bobby wanted to go to McDonald's the other day for breakfast, and I said, okay. And so we went, got some, although I hate to go places when we got plenty of food at home, but anyway, it's father-son time, we can talk. Sometimes he spills things he wouldn't say otherwise when we're doing this. But anyway, they've been putting calories by the items. I looked up there and there's really nice pancakes, sausage, eggs, 1,350 calories on that breakfast. You know what our daily need of calories is?
Not too many of that.
Yeah, around 2,000. Depending on the size of the person and how much exercise and work you're doing. But that one breakfast, more than half of a daily need. Well, anyway, it looked good. If I hadn't read the calories on it, I would have ordered it, but I got the other, and then anyway. No, I got the Egg McMuffin with the whites. It was not too much. I don't know, it was about 300. It was more than I should have. But anyway, the last time I was at McDonald's, I got the salad. I got the salad. It only had 250 calories as opposed to 400 and 600 for the sandwiches and hamburgers. Anyway, another thing in this article, it tried to help people know how much they should tip. As if people on minimum wage who are barely getting by are going to go to places where you have to give a tip. But one of the things they put in there, what to tip your pool boy. Your pool boy. Totally insensitive and out of touch. Unbelievable. Anyway, put that aside. Just very, very curious of what's going on within our economy today, this ideology of scarcity versus an understanding of God's grace and abundance. And there's enough if we just can take care of each other and be responsible. Anyway, the point of which, with Brueggemann's analysis, we see the issue of an ideology of scarcity still present in human decision-making, but it was from the earliest times, in this early time of the earliest time things got written down. But the juxtaposition, or to juxtapose, is Yahweh, or God's will, God's Spirit intervening into history. We see that happening. God's will and purposes are intervening into the human life and human history in everyday economic and political activities. It's just not the spiritual realm that's separated from the everyday realities. But when Abraham trusts, he has faith in the promise, and he is going to receive a blessing. And he does not have to be anxious and self-serving. Now, another scholar, Spicer, points out in his commentary, history is expressed through individuals, and reminds us of that. Personal history, vivid, concrete, and direct. And so the focus is between Abraham and Lot, who will become Israel, and then Lot later becomes the Moabites and the Ammonites later on in history. But Lot is orphaned. He's raised by Terah and the grandfather, and then Abram takes over when Terah dies. But the two must part. Abram, the senior in relationship, as I said before, would have had the first choice under normal circumstances. He has the power, he has the authority, he can take first choice. But he acts generously and cedes the right to Lot, and Lot does not fail to take advantage and picks the greener, richer portion. Now, the story ends with a note of irony that Lot's choice leads him into Sodom and Gomorrah, and bad things are going to happen down there sometime soon with all the wickedness and the destruction, while this rugged hill country will have a glorious future. So a side thing there is appearances are deceiving. What looks good right now might not be so good tomorrow or in the future. When Bruce Vaughter is discussing this passage, and his take on the account, he adds a few interesting points. He states that, to Abraham's credit, keeping the peace and avoiding conflict and bloodshed is an admirable quality among the pastoral herders. As I said a minute ago, they're a minority. They're a vulnerable population on the fringes of the settled areas, and so it's not healthy to be fighting among yourselves and creating a ruckus that the more powerful folks around might just want to kick the lot of you off of the land. They don't want that nonsense going on. But to Lot's credit, seizing the opportunity to acquire the most or the best for oneself, but not just for oneself, but for one's family and the people that he is responsible for. I mean, we have individuals that we're talking about, but we remember they had lots of people that were a part of their group. And so it is really not selfish and greedy so much as prudent survival tactics, not wanton greed and mean-spirited or vainglory. So that's Vaughter's take on that, and that's another value in the culture. I mean, the folks are living on the margins, and to learn the techniques of survival is very important. You have to be prudent, use good judgment, don't waste opportunities. So Abraham is wise and generous, Lot is prudent and practical, and both virtues are in the culture. But the ancient Yahwist is not interested in the more sophisticated or deeper ethical and philosophical examination of prioritizing of, which one of those is more important or more valued. Doesn't get into short-term, long-term issues except by inference. The irony of the story is that the immediate short-term gain for Lot turns sour, and his blessing is lost amidst the human wickedness in the land that we soon will find out. Vaughter points out that it is likely that the region's lush and green look and appearance and the abundant water is really more legendary and wishful thinking than it was an actual historical recollection. it was kind of an exaggeration of the legendary growth of the story he's suggesting. He also points out that the departure of Lot was seen as a total withdrawal from the promised land, that Lot and his descendants will not have any claim on this land because he goes completely away with his future clan and tribe. Vodder also points out that the locale of the terebinth of Mamre, which is at Hebron, Hebron. Okay. Well, I can do like a lot of professors. I'll say it one way and if everybody else says it the wrong way, it's not because I'm wrong, it's just I'm the most well-informed. And anyway, Hebron did not exist at the time of the Abraham person was living in the area, and the terebinth of Mamre, at the time the stories were developing, they had kind of lost touch with its significance. They just still had the name. So anyway, it's a place that existed and still exists today, but it took on great significance as Israel continued to develop. I whipped right through that. With all that I had to do with the Christmas stuff and had to get ready for preaching today, and then I had to spend a lot of hours researching this, I thought I had enough for you. Any questions? Maybe there's something that I can pull out of my memory bank. Or anybody remember this story before I read it? It's familiar. It's not too rare. Oh, that was Dr. Power at Perkins Seminary. He in the Perkins Journal. I just happened to get this and hold on to it. I didn't take it all the time, but it's the book of Genesis, a folk. It's out of print, I'm sure. 1984. I got that and I thought, well, that's really interesting. It didn't follow. But the way he tells the story, he's already telling it with his slant, and he leaves out some of the others. And that's kind of a lesson in biblical translations. The translators will have an idea that they think this is the point or the message of the story, and so they will choose the words that illustrate that or emphasize that particular interpretation. And so we will find, particularly in some of the Bibles that more conservative traditions like to read, the scholarship in them will choose the more precise, conservative interpretation type of words in their translation. And in Revised Standard or the Catholic versions of the Bible that have really rich scholarship in them will not tend to do that, except I think the brothers and sisters of Jesus that are mentioned in the Catholic version, it calls them cousins. Well, sometimes there's an element of paraphrasing, and other times we've got various manuscripts that are chosen from, and the scholars can pick the words in different manuscripts over other manuscripts as they do their translations. And so that's part of it. You know, we can... in Catholicism, and not only was Mary a virgin, her mother was a virgin. An immaculate conception, which to us Protestants' way of thinking is kind of undercutting and denying the incarnation. That, it's God in the flesh It is God truly with us as a human being that we can relate to and understand. But if we make him so supernatural that not only was there a virgin birth, but the birth mother was an immaculate conception as well, and that and the sexuality issue that Joseph never had relationships with Mary before or after or ever again, which means sex is dirty, it's nasty, it's evil, it's wicked, it's a source of original sin, and therefore everybody should stop having sex. We should neuter every one of our children when they're born so they won't have sex, and that way they will be pure and holy and righteous and not corrupt and perverted by this awful sex.
Yeah, but Catholics believe that because that's what they do believe in the action.
Well, I know they do, but partly, but then it's kind of messed up. I mean it's not healthy. There's a lot of unhealthiness in that. I mean, the whole. Well, in some places, yeah. I mean, there are real conservatives within Catholicism that still hold very conservative views and very unhealthy ideas that way. Most priests in the parish with their feet on the ground dealing with real people aren't so. But some of in the curia and the people that are isolated, a lot of times, and often they're the decision makers, so they kind of hang on to some of that. And the problem is, unfortunately, so much of that is Greek thought that took over the theology from New Testament times and the Hellenizing of the Greek world. And the Greek thinking is very foreign to the Hebrew thinking and conceptualizing what's healthy and natural and so forth. So it's anyway, it's a kind of a mess. So what are you supposed to believe?
I don't know. I went to Catholic 3 years, and I never was never taught, and I had to listen to criticism, although I didn't take it, and I never heard about and a mother Jesus.
Yeah, it's right. Yeah, there are different places where that has been taken to the extreme, but most folks don't go there because it's not biblical. I mean, it's extra biblical kinds of things, and we have stories. The young Jesus performing miracles in some of those Gnostic Gospels that. He was a naughty boy. He did mean things with his powers in some of those stories. So we know that the tradition can develop and create some things that aren't accurate, aren't helpful, and sometimes can be embarrassing. So it's just a process. We have to try to pull it back to the core and try to use our best reasoning and understanding. Yes?
Bill, do you think Catholic is into writing Paul in some of his letters? He talks about celibacy and you can be celibate.
Yes.
A noble ideal.
Right. And part of the and we've got St. Paul and we've got John Wesley and we've got Calvin and some of the really strong and powerful church leaders. When we really look at their personalities, a lot of them were kind of neurotic, and they were so focused that they were blind to a lot of other things, and so they didn't have a balanced view and understanding. And particularly Paul, he was a very driven guy, and he understood the power of sexuality. And it's a distraction. It's a distraction from, the more important things. And if you think this is all important, don't waste your time getting married and being in love and, going out on dates and raising kids. That's a distraction. It's going to slow you down. We've got to spread this message all over the world. If you do that, you can't be effective. And so that's kind of where it is. And we know that sexuality is very powerful, and it's easy to lead people into poor judgment and making mistakes and getting in trouble. One of the problems with that is that we blame the women for being so beautiful. You're so beautiful. I can't control myself. It's your fault. So, what? Where do I get that? Oh, that's from Islam. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, that's strong. Yeah, that's strong with the burqas and all of that. That's that ideology or that belief that it's the woman that's the seductress. Us men, we're just too weak. We can't control ourselves. So women, you have to control yourselves. Dress in a tent. Yeah, I know. It's, anyway. Well, I've used enough of our time. Thank you for your questions, and let's pray. Dear God, we thank you for this time of year when we remember that Jesus was born, a human being, and came into the world, and that in some special way you were in him, and we see your true nature and your love through the way he lived and the way he loved and the way he cared for people. So we are grateful to celebrate the beginning of his life with us, and we're also thankful for the promise that he is with us always and will be with us always, and that we are not alone. In his name we pray. Amen.